Most farmers today are watching their soil get sicker every single season, and they have no idea the cure was already perfected thousands of years ago. We buy synthetic fertilizers, we fight pest outbreaks, and we wonder why our yields keep shrinking. Meanwhile, ancient farmers in Rome, Mesopotamia, and the medieval English countryside were running crop rotation systems so sophisticated that modern agronomists are only now beginning to understand them. After 25 years of studying traditional farming methods, today I'm sharing 7 brilliant crop rotation systems that ancient civilizations perfected and that we have almost completely forgotten. Number 4 is the one modern agriculture abandoned in the 1950s, and the consequences are still devastating our soil today. Plus, stick around to the end for a bonus rotation trick the ancient Romans used that you can start using in your backyard garden this very season. Here is my confession. For the first 12 years I farmed seriously, I did what every modern grower does. I planted the same crops in the same beds season after season. Tomatoes in the south corner, corn along the back fence, potatoes in the middle row. Same spots, same logic, same result. Which was, if I am being completely honest with you, a slow and quiet disaster. Year 1 was fine. Year 2, I noticed the tomatoes weren't setting fruit the way they had before. I added more fertilizer. Year 3, the blight came. I sprayed for it. Year 4, my potato yield dropped by nearly a third, and I couldn't figure out why. The soil looked the same. I was doing everything the Extension Office recommended. I was doing everything right, according to the modern playbook. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly poisoning my own ground. Not with chemicals, not with neglect, just with repetition. Every time you plant the same crop family in the same patch of earth, you are doing 3 things you absolutely do not want to do. You are depleting the same specific nutrients that crop depends on year after year until the soil is simply exhausted. You are building up a reservoir of the exact pests and pathogens that love that crop because they never have to go anywhere. Their food source just keeps showing up in the same spot every spring. And you are slowly destroying the microbial diversity underground, the invisible ecosystem that healthy plants actually depend on, because you keep feeding only one type of root chemistry into the soil. I was farming in the most expensive, most labor-intensive, most input-dependent way possible, and I thought I was being efficient. The wake-up call came on a research trip to rural Turkey. I was visiting an elderly farmer outside of Konya, a region where people have been farming the same land continuously for over 8,000 years. 8,000 years of unbroken agriculture on the same soil. I expected to see depleted, worn-out ground. What I found instead was some of the darkest, most alive, most productive topsoil I have ever put my hands into. I asked him through an interpreter what his secret was. He laughed like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He said there was no secret. He said his grandfather taught him, and his grandfather's grandfather taught him, going back further than anyone could remember. You never ask the same soil to do the same job twice in a row. You give it a different partner each season. You let it rest, you let it rebuild, and it will feed you forever. He wasn't describing a technique, he was describing a philosophy, a relationship with land that his culture had maintained for millennia and that ours had abandoned in the space of a single generation. I came home and I started digging, not in my garden, in history books, agricultural archaeology papers, records from Roman farming manuals, medieval English open field systems, ancient Chinese rice paddy rotations, indigenous American planting traditions. What I found genuinely stunned me. Every great agricultural civilization that lasted, and I mean lasted, for centuries, not decades, had developed a sophisticated crop rotation system. Not by accident, not by luck, by careful observation passed down through generations, refined across hundreds of seasons until it worked almost perfectly. These weren't primitive guesses. They were tested, functional systems that maintained soil health, suppressed pests naturally, fixed nitrogen without a single bag of synthetic fertilizer, and produced reliable yields year after year without destroying the land beneath them. Then, in the mid-20th century, we decided we didn't need any of that anymore. We had chemicals, we had tractors, we had hybrid seeds. We could just force the land to produce what we wanted, when we wanted, where we wanted. We called it the Green Revolution. And in the short term, yields exploded. But the cost is becoming impossible to ignore. Topsoil loss is now at crisis levels globally. Pesticide resistance is accelerating. Input costs have made small farming nearly economically impossible, and the land that was supposed to feed future generations is getting weaker every decade. The ancient farmers weren't romantic. They weren't working with candlelight and hoping for the best. They had figured something out that we are desperately trying to relearn right now, and most of us have never even heard their names, let alone their methods. That is what this video is about. I am going to walk you through 7 of the most brilliant crop rotation systems ever developed, where they came from, why they worked, and how you can apply the core principles whether you're farming 10 acres or managing 4 raised beds in a backyard garden. These aren't museum pieces, they are living, functional systems, and some of them are so elegantly simple that you will wonder why we ever stopped using them in the first place. Let's start with the principle that underpins every single one of them, because if you understand this, everything else will make immediate sense.
Here's what you need to understand before we get into the systems themselves. Soil is not dirt. That sounds simple, but it is the most important distinction in all of agriculture, and it is the one that modern farming has spent the last 70 years ignoring. Dirt is inert. It is just mineral particles, ground-up rock essentially. Soil is something else entirely. Soil is alive. A single teaspoon of healthy agricultural soil contains more living organisms than there are people on the entire planet. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, arthropods, earthworms, an entire underground civilization working in extraordinary coordination, breaking down organic matter, releasing nutrients in plant-available forms, building the physical structure that lets roots penetrate and water drain properly. When your soil is alive, it does most of the work for you. When it isn't, you have to do all of that work yourself, artificially, expensively, and with diminishing returns every single season. Now, here's the mechanism that makes crop rotation so powerful, and why the ancient farmers who figured this out were, in a very real sense, working with a level of biological sophistication that we are only now able to measure and confirm scientifically. Every plant family has a completely unique relationship with the soil beneath it. Legumes, your beans, peas, clover, and vetches, form partnerships with specific soil bacteria called rhizobia, which pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and fix it into the soil in a form that other plants can use. They are essentially free fertilizer factories, working underground without any human input. Brassicas, your cabbages, kale, broccoli, and mustards, release chemical compounds from their roots that actively suppress certain soil-borne pathogens and nematodes. They are natural fumigants. Grasses and grains have dense, fibrous root systems that penetrate deep into the soil profile, breaking up compaction and drawing up minerals from layers that shallow-rooted plants can never reach. Deep-rooted plants, like carrots and parsnips, do something similar. They mine the subsoil, and when their residue breaks down, deposit those minerals back in the upper layers where other crops can access them. Each plant family also feeds different communities of soil microorganisms through its root exudates, the sugars, acids, and proteins that roots secrete into the surrounding soil. This is called the rhizosphere effect, and it means that different crops are essentially feeding different underground populations. When you rotate crops, you are diversifying the underground food supply. You are feeding multiple microbial communities, keeping the whole system balanced and productive. Now, flip that around and think about what happens when you don't rotate. Plant the same crop in the same spot every year, and you are doing the opposite of everything I just described. You were starving the microbial communities that other plant families would have fed. You were depleting the specific nutrients that crop requires without allowing the recovery mechanisms that different plant families would trigger. You are creating a perfectly stable, perfectly reliable food supply for every pest and pathogen that specializes in that crop, because their host is always right there, always in the same place, always available. And you are slowly collapsing the biological complexity that makes the soil functional in the first place. This is exactly what agricultural scientists call monoculture fatigue. It is not a modern problem. Ancient farmers observed it long before anyone had words like rhizobia or rhizosphere. They didn't know the molecular biology, but they saw the results clearly: yields dropping, plants weakening, pest pressure increasing, soil turning pale and lifeless. And they worked backwards from those observations to develop systems that prevented the problem entirely. The principle they landed on, across multiple civilizations with no contact with each other, was essentially the same: diversity over time in the same space. Not diversity across different fields, diversity within the same field across consecutive seasons. Give the soil a different partner each year. Let one crop feed the microbes that the previous crop starved. Let one crop fix what the previous crop depleted. Let one crop suppress the pests that the previous crop attracted. And after enough cycles, the soil doesn't just recover, it improves. Each rotation builds on the last. The system becomes more productive, not less, as the years pass. That is the complete opposite of what we experience with conventional monoculture farming, where every additional year of the same crop requires more inputs to maintain the same output. The ancient rotation systems ran in the opposite direction. The longer you applied them, the less work the soil required from you. That is not mysticism. That is ecology, and it is exactly what the 7 systems I'm about to show you were designed to exploit. One more thing before we get into the list, and this is important. You do not need a farm to use these principles. Every single system I'm about to describe can be scaled down. The 3-field system of medieval Europe works just as elegantly across 3 raised beds as it did across 300 acres. The ancient Chinese wet-dry rotation can be adapted for a container garden. The core logic does not change with scale. What changes is simply the physical footprint. The biology is identical. So, whether you're managing a large homestead, a suburban backyard plot, or a handful of containers on a balcony, what comes next applies to you. Now, let's get into the systems. 7 of them, all brilliant, all ancient, and all almost completely forgotten. Secret 1. The 3-field system, medieval Europe, 8th century. Most people assume medieval farmers were barely surviving. In reality, they had cracked one of the most durable rotation frameworks in agricultural history. The 3-field system divided any growing area into exactly 3 sections. Section 1 grew a spring crop, oats, barley, or legumes. Section 2 grew a winter crop, wheat or rye. Section 3 was left completely fallow, allowed to rest, grow weeds, and be grazed by livestock whose manure fed the soil. Every season, the sections rotated one position. Every 3 years, each section had rested once, grown a nitrogen-hungry grain once, and grown a soil-restoring crop once. The result was a self-sustaining cycle that maintained productivity across the same land for centuries. No synthetic inputs, no soil testing, no intervention beyond observation and rotation. Your application: divide your beds or plots into 3 groups. Rotate between heavy feeders, soil builders, and a cover crop or rest period. 3 years for full cycle. The soil does the rest.
Secret 2. The Mesopotamian fallow flood rotation. Ancient Iraq, 6,000 years ago. In the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, farmers discovered that alternating cultivated seasons with deliberately flooded fallow seasons broke pest cycles almost completely. When a field was flooded and left unplanted, the anaerobic conditions created by standing water killed the soil-borne pathogens and insect larvae that had built up during cultivation. The flooding also deposited fresh mineral-rich silt across the surface, essentially resetting the nutrient profile of the topsoil. When cultivation resumed, farmers were planting into what was functionally new soil. They weren't just resting the land, they were actively resetting it. Your application? If you have beds prone to persistent pest or disease pressure, try a wet fallow. Keep the beds saturated and unplanted for a full season. Even without flood silt, the anaerobic period disrupts pest cycles significantly. Secret 3. The Native American Three Sisters succession, pre-Columbian Americas. You have probably heard of the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash planted together. What most people miss is that the genius wasn't just in the combination, it was in the rotation that followed. After a Three Sisters season, indigenous farmers rotated that ground into a completely unplanted medicine or herb patch for one full year, then into a sunflower and amaranth bed the year after. This three-stage rotation, heavy polyculture, light aromatic planting, grain harvest, cycled nutrients, disrupted pests, and used aromatic plant root chemicals to cleanse the soil between the intensive Three Sisters seasons. The companion planting gets all the attention, the rotation behind it was equally sophisticated. Your application? Don't just plant Three Sisters and repeat, follow it with a light aromatic planting, herbs, marigolds, or calendula, then a grain or grass crop. Let the full three-stage cycle run before returning to the intensive combination. Real quick, if you are finding these systems genuinely useful, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week I go this deep into traditional farming knowledge that modern agriculture has left behind, and I do not want you to miss what is coming next. Secret 4. The Roman green manure rotation, 200 BC. This is the one that modern agriculture abandoned in the 1950s, and the damage from that decision is still visible in soil health data today. Roman agricultural writer Columella documented a rotation system built around a deliberate green manure phase. After every grain harvest, the field was immediately sown with lupins, vetch, or field beans, not to be harvested, but to be plowed directly back into the soil at peak growth. The still living plant matter, rich in nitrogen and fresh organic compounds, was incorporated into the soil whole and left to decompose before the next planting. This practice fed soil microbial populations at enormous scale. It replaced nitrogen without any external inputs. And Roman farms maintained by this system were documented as productive for 4 and 5 consecutive centuries on the same ground. When synthetic nitrogen fertilizers made green manuring seem unnecessary, this practice essentially vanished from mainstream agriculture within a single decade. Your application? Every third season, sow a bed with crimson clover, field beans, or mustard. Do not harvest it. At peak flowering, turn the entire crop back into the soil and wait 4 weeks before planting. The improvement in the following season's yield is dramatic. Secret 5. The Chinese wet-dry rice rotation, Han Dynasty, 200 BC. Ancient Chinese farmers in the Yangtze River Delta discovered that alternating flooded rice paddies with dry season vegetable crops created a perpetual fertility cycle that required almost no external input. The flooded rice phase suppressed dry soil weeds and pests. The dry vegetable phase, typically brassicas or root crops, broke the anaerobic-dependent pathogens that accumulated during rice flooding. Each phase actively cleaned up the problems the other created. The system was essentially self-correcting. Your application? If you grow any water-loving crops, alternate their bed with a dry season brassica rotation. The phase contrast does the pest management for you. Secret 6. The Andean potato terrace rotation, Inca Empire, 1400 AD. The Inca didn't just build terraces for erosion control, they built them as a rotation system. Each terrace tier had a designated crop in a given year, and the rotation moved crops progressively up or down the hillside in a fixed sequence. Higher, cooler tiers rested while lower tiers produced, then the cycle reversed. Temperature and microclimate differences between tiers meant that pests and pathogens could not simply migrate upward to follow their host crop. The environmental barrier was built into the rotation by design. Your application? Use microclimates in your own space deliberately. Rotate crops between sunnier and shadier areas. The environmental shift disrupts pests just as effectively as changing plant families. Secret 7. the European four-field Norfolk rotation, 18th century England. The Norfolk four-field system is arguably the most precise rotation ever formalized in Western agriculture. 4 beds, 4 crops, 1 fixed sequence every year, indefinitely. Wheat, turnips, barley, clover. Wheat fed humans. Turnips fed livestock, whose manure fertilized the next field. Barley fed both humans and animals. Clover fixed nitrogen and was plowed back in. Every element fed the next. Nothing was wasted. The system produced more food per acre than anything seen in England before it, without a single synthetic input, and it powered the agricultural revolution that preceded the industrial one. Your application? Run a strict 4-bed rotation: grain or heavy feeder, root vegetable, light feeder, legume or cover crop. Repeat the sequence indefinitely. Within 3 to 4 full cycles, your soil biology will be unrecognizable compared to where you started. Bonus: the Roman indicator plant method. Here is the stick-around tip I promised you at the beginning. Roman agricultural farmers didn't wait for yields to drop before adjusting their rotation. They read the land in real time using indicator plants, wild volunteers that naturally colonized a field and signaled exactly what the soil needed next. Dense patches of wild mustard meant the soil was nitrogen depleted and ready for a legume phase. Thistle taking over indicated compaction, time for a deep-rooted crop like turnips or carrots. Clover volunteering on its own meant the soil was healthy and could handle a heavy feeder without damage. The land was constantly communicating. They simply knew the language. Before your next season, walk your beds slowly. Note every weed that volunteers without invitation. Then look up what that weed indicates about your soil chemistry. You will have a rotation recommendation more accurate than most modern soil tests, and it will cost you nothing. 7 systems, thousands of years of combined agricultural wisdom, and every single one of them built on the same truth, that healthy soil is a relationship, not a resource. If this opened your eyes to what we have been leaving on the table, give this video a like and drop a comment below telling me which of these 7 systems you are going to try first in your garden this season. I read every single one. And if you want more forgotten farming knowledge that actually works, subscribe and hit the bell. This is exactly what we do here every week. Until next time, take care of your soil, and it will take care of you.